The Edge Chronicles, Beyond the Deep Woods, by Paul Stewart and Chris Riddle, read by P. Waitonick. Chapter 4. The Skullpelt. As the forest, green, shadowy, and forbidding, closed in around him once more, Twig nervously fingered the talismans and amulets around his neck, one by one. If there was some powerful evil at the heart of the deep woods, then could these small pieces of wood and leather truly be enough to keep it at bay? I hope I'll never have to find out, he muttered. On and on Twig walked. The trees became unfamiliar. Some had spikes, some had suckers, some had eyes. All of them looked dangerous to Twig. Sometimes they grew so close together that, despite his misgivings, Twig had no choice but to squeeze between their gnarled trunks. Time and again, Twig cursed his shape and size. Unlike the wood trolls and slaughterers who were short, or the bander bear, which was strong, he was not designed for a life in the deep woods. And yet, when the trees abruptly thinned out, Twig grew still more anxious. There was no sign of the promised path. He glanced over his shoulder for any creature that might mean him harm as he scurried across the wide, dappled clearing as quickly as he could and back into the trees. Apart from a small, furry creature with scaly ears which spat at him as he passed, none of the Deepwoods inhabitants seemed interested in the gangly youth hurrying through their domain. "Surely if I keep going I'll reach the path," he said. "Surely!" he repeated, and was shocked by how small and uncertain his voice sounded. Behind him, an unfamiliar high-pitched squeal echoed round the air. It was answered by a second squeal to his left, and a third to his right. I don't know who they are, thought Twig, but I don't like the sound of them. He kept walking straight ahead, but quicker now. Beads of sweat broke out across his forehead. He bit into his lower lip and started to run. "Go away," he whispered. "Leave me alone." As if in response, the squeals echoed louder and closer than before. Head lowered and arms raised, Twig ran faster. He crashed through the undergrowth, creepers lashed his body, thorns scratched his face and hands. Branches swung across his path as if trying to trip him up or knock him senseless. And all the while the forest was growing deeper and denser, as the canopy of leaves closed above his head, dismally dark. Suddenly, Twig found himself staring at a turquoise light which sparkled like a jewel far away in front of him. For a moment he wondered whether the unusual color might signal danger, but only for a moment. Already the strains of hypnotic music were washing over him. As he got closer, the light spilled out onto the leafy forest floor. Twig looked down at his feet, awash with turquoise green. The music, a swirl of voices and strings, grew louder. Twig paused. What should he do? He was too frightened to go on, but he couldn't go back. He had to go on. Chewing on the edge of his scarf, Twig took a step forwards, then another, and another. The turquoise light washed all over him, so dazzling he had to shield his eyes. The music, loud and sad, filled his ears. Slowly he lowered his hands and looked around. Twig was standing in a clearing. Although the turquoise light was bright, it was also misty. Nothing was clear. Shadowy shapes floated before his eyes, crossed one another, and disappeared. The music grew louder still. All at once the figure stepped out of the mist and stood before him. It was a woman, short and stocky, with beaded tufts of hair. Twig couldn't see her face. "Who are you?" he asked. And yet, as the music rose to a slushy crescendo, Twig knew the answer to his question. The short, stumpy legs, the powerful shoulders, and, when she moved her head to one side, the profile of that rubbery nose. Apart from the strange clothes she was wearing, there was no doubt. "Mother mine?" said Twig, softly, but Spelda turned away and began to walk off into the turquoise mist. The unfamiliar blue fur gown she was wearing trailed along the ground behind her. "Don't go!" Twig bellowed after her. "Mother! Spelda!" The music grew increasingly frantic. The singing voices became discordant. "Come back!" Twig cried as he sprinted off after her. "Don't leave me!" He ran and ran through the dazzling mist. Sometimes he knocked into branches and stumps he hadn't seen. Sometimes he tripped and fell sprawling to the ground. Each time, he picked himself up, brushed himself down, and set off once more. Spelda had come looking for him. That was much clearer. She must have known I was in trouble, he thought. That I was strayed from the path. She's come to take me home after all. I can't lose her now. Then Twig saw her again. She was standing some way ahead, with her back to him. The music had become soft and gentle, and the voices sang a soothing lullaby. Twig approached the figure, his whole body tingling with expectation. He ran up to her, calling out her name, but Spelda didn't move. "Mother!" Twig cried. "It's me!" Spelda nodded and turned slowly. Twig was shaking from head to toe. Why was she acting so strangely? The music was low. Spelda was standing in front of Twig, head bowed, and with the hood of the fur gown hanging down over her face. Slowly she opened her arms to him, to wrap him up in her warm embrace. Twig stepped forwards. At that moment, Spelda let out a terrible scream and staggered back, flapping wildly at her head. The music became loud again. It beat, urgent and rhythmical, like a pounding heart. She screamed a second time, a savage cry that chilled Twig to the bone, and struck out frantically at the air around her. "Mother mine!" Twig cried. "What's happening?" He saw blood trickling down from a gash on her scalp. Another cut appeared on her shoulder, and yet another on her back. The blue gown turned to violet as the blood spread. And still she writhed and screamed and lashed out at her unseen assailant. Twig stared aghast. He would have helped if he could, but there was nothing, absolutely nothing at all, that he could do. He had never felt so useless in his life. Suddenly he saw Spelda clutching her neck. Blood gushed out between her fingers. She whimpered softly, collapsed, and laid on the ground, twitching horribly. Then she fell still. "No!" Twig wailed. He dropped to his knees and shook the body by the shoulders. There was no sign of life. "She's dead," he sobbed, "and it's all my fault. Why?" he howled. Why? Burning tears ran down his face and splashed onto the blood-stained gown as Twig hugged his mother's lifeless body. "That's it," came a voice from above his head. "Let it all out. Let it all out. Wash the lies away." Twig looked up. "Who's there?" he said, and wiped his eyes. He saw nothing. No one. The tears continued to come. "It's me, and I'm here," said the voice. Twig stared up at the place the voice was coming from, but still couldn't see anything. He jumped to his feet. "Come on, then!" he screamed and pulled the knife from his belt. "Try having a go at me!" He stabbed at the air wildly. "Come on!" he roared. "Show yourself, you coward!" But it was no good. The invisible assassin remained invisible. Revenge would have to wait. Tears of sorrow, of frustration, of rage streamed down Twig's cheeks. He couldn't stop. Then something strange began to happen. At first, Twig thought he was imagining it, but no. Everything around him was slowly changing. The mist thinned. The turquoise light began to dim. Even the music faded away. Twig discovered he was still in the forest after all. More alarmingly, as he looked around, he saw what it was that had spoken to him. "You!" Twig gasped. He recognized the creature from the tales that Taghair had told him. It was a cater bird, or rather the cater bird, for each of their number considered themselves to be one and the same. The pain of loss rose in his throat. Why did you do it? He blurted out. Why did you kill Spelda, my own mother? The caterbird cocked its head to one side. A shaft of sunlight glinted off the massive horned bill, and a purple light swiveled around to inspect the boy. It wasn't your mother, Twig, it said. But I saw her, said Twig. I heard her voice. She said she was my mother. Why would she... Take a look, it said. Look at her fingers. Look at her toes. Pull back her hair and look at her face, the caterbird insisted. Then tell me it's your mother. Twig returned to the body and crouched down. Already it looked different. The coat now looked less like an item of clothing, more like real fur. He ran his gaze along the outstretched arm and realized that no sleeve could ever be so tight-fitting. He moved around the body and suddenly caught sight of a hand. 3 scaly fingers tipped with orange claws. And the feet were the same. Twig gasped and looked back at the caterbird. But the face, the bird said firmly. Look at the face and see what I saved you from. With trembling fingers, Twig reached forwards and pulled back the crumbled fur. He yelped with horror. Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. Taut scaly skin, like brown oil paper wrapped around a skull. Bulging yellow eyes glaring blindly back at him, and the mouth with its rows of hooked teeth, contorted by rage and pain. What is it? He asked quietly. The Gloamglazer? Oh no, not the Gloamglazer, replied the bird. There are some who call it a Skullpelt, it said. A hunter of dreamers who lose their way in the lullaby grooves. Twig looked up. There were lullaby trees all around, humming softly in the dappled light. He touched the scarf around his neck. When among lullaby trees, the bird went on, you see only what trees want you to see, until it is too late. It was lucky for you that I hatched when I did. Above the caterbird, a giant cocoon dangled like a discarded sock. You hatched from that? Said Twig. Naturally, said the caterbird. Where else? Ah, little one, you have so much to learn. Taghair was right. You know Taghair? Twig gasped. But I don't understand. The caterbird tutted impatiently. Taghair sleeps in our cocoons and dreams our dreams, it explained. Yes, I know Taghair. As I know all the other caterbirds. We share the same dreams. I wish Taghair was here now, said Twig, sadly. He'd know what I ought to do. His head was throbbing from the hum of the trees. I'm useless, he sighed. A miserable excuse for a wood troll. I strayed from the path. I'm sure lost forever, and I have nobody to blame but myself. I wish that the Skullpelt had torn me limb from limb. At least that would have been an end to it. Now, said the caterbird gently, and hopped down beside him. You know what Taghair would say, don't you? I don't know anything, Twig wailed. I'm a failure. He would say, the caterbird went on, if you stray from the well-trodden path, then tread your own path for others to follow. Your destiny lies beyond the deep woods. Beyond the deep woods? Twig looked up into the caterbird's purple eyes. But there is no beyond the deep woods. The deep woods go on forever and ever. There is up and there is down. The sky is up and the woods are down, and that is it. Every wood troll knows that this is so. Every wood troll sticks to the path, said the caterbird softly. Maybe there is no beyond for a wood troll, but there is for you. Suddenly, with a loud clap of its jet-black wings, the caterbird leaped from the branch and soared up into the air. Stop! Twig yelled. But it was already too late. The great caterbird was flapping away over the trees. Twig stared miserably ahead of him. He wanted to shout. He wanted to scream. but the fear of attracting the attention of one of the fiercer Deepwoods creatures kept his mouth clamped firmly shut. "You are at my hatching, and I shall watch over you always," came the caterbird's distant call. "When you truly need me, I shall be there." "I truly need you now," Twig muttered silkily. He kicked the dead Skullpelt. It gave a long, low groan. Or was it just the sound of the lullaby trees? Twig didn't wait to find out. He left the lullaby grove and ran headlong off into the endless, pathless depths of the dark and somber deep woods. The forest was dark with night once more when Twig stopped running. He stood, hands on hips, and head bowed, gasping for breath. "I can't go another step," he panted. "I just can't." There was nothing else for it. Twig would have to find a safe place to spend the night. The tree nearest to him had a massive trunk and a thick covering of broad green leaves, which would protect him if the weather worsened. More importantly, it looked harmless. Twig collected together a pile of dry fallen leaves and pushed them into a dip between the roots of the tree. Then he crawled into the makeshift mattress in the makeshift cot, curled himself into a ball, and closed his eyes. All around him, the night sounds whined, wailed, and screamed. Twig folded his arms over his head to cut out the unnerving din. "You'll be all right," he said to himself. "The caterbird promised to watch over you." And with that, he drifted off to sleep, unaware that at that moment the caterbird was otherwise engaged with a family of bush nymphs many, many miles away. Well, that's it for this chapter. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like. If you'd like to see more, feel free to stick around and subscribe. Thanks for listening.